everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'd like to talk about the Flames of Hope and why I was disappointed with the finale to Arc 3. This video contains some major spoilers for the Flames of Hope. I was originally going to do a non-spoiler review, but it would be hard to talk about specific details and the flaws this book has, so I decided to end up doing a review with spoilers. This will spoil the entire book for you, so please keep that in mind. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the video. Flames of Hope is utterly bizarre in every way possible. I'm going to discuss my dislikes about the book and then get into things I enjoyed, that way I can end this video on a positive note. So first I'll be discussing the treatment of Queen Wasp. The thing I think the fandom can collectively agree upon is that Tui completely wasted Wasp's character. As soon as Freedom and Cottonmouth were properly introduced, Wasp was totally sidelined. She was supposed to be one of the most powerful villains in the series, and then the twist is that she's completely powerless. I've never even liked Wasp to begin with, and now my distaste for her has grown. She'll be one of the most intimidating and challenging villains for the Secret Stealth team to face, yet Cottonmouth and Freedom were just like, yeah, in reality she's completely powerful. Wasp was such a waste of opportunity, and I'm incredibly. This is not how you do twist villains. Wasp still should have had a role, or maybe there could have even been some kind of plot twist, where Wasp really was more powerful than the controllers of the other mind once thought. I would have preferred for her to actually have had a role, and she was hyped up for nothing. Another thing I found myself absolutely hating about this book was just how weird it was. There were an absurd amount of flashbacks, and it made the book feel repetitive at times. The Dangerous Gifts flashback sequences were important to Snowfall's character development, but also provided updates on what was going on in Pantala. The flashbacks here just seemed unimportant. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy a lot of them. The problem is just that there were too many. And the story behind the Scorching is completely ridiculous. Tui, this idea just completely flopped. It was so weird at times that I literally had to close the book, sit there for a moment to process what I just read, and then continue reading. Cottonmouth is the dumbest, most stereotypical villain I've ever seen. Just the whole story of the Scorching was totally ridiculous, and I feel like I've seen those kinds of stories a million times in fantasy. The parts of the Scorching we had seen before made it seem so original, and there were tons of possibilities for Tui to introduce a fantastic new addition to the lore. But instead we got something that didn't feel like it belonged in Wings of Fire. The Scorching flashbacks were way too long, complicated, and seemed like they were out of place in the story. I could rant about how stupid the Scorching is for hours, but I feel like I need to move on. This is sort of a minor nitpick, but Tui changed some aspects of Wings of Fire. She literally pulled a J.K. Rowling and changed things literally at the very end, and there were just such odd things to update. For example, apparently now Steaming Blood is blue and Hive Blood is green. Since when has that ever been canon? It was never mentioned in the books, and the graphic novels even depict every tribe's blood as being red except for Icewings, because they canonically have blue blood. So why did she feel the need to add such a useless detail? I'd be totally fine if the tribes had different colored blood, but the fact she added it after the main story is just so mind-boggling to me. An egg the color of dragon's blood in the prophecy applies to every tribe but the Icewings. I do think Tui made a mistake there, as part of the story wouldn't make sense to Icewings. But that detail wouldn't be that big of a deal if more tribes had other blood colors. So now the prophecy's line doesn't matter to Sea-Wings, Icewings, Hive-Wings, and probably more tribes if Tui decides to continue this trend. Just such a strange thing to add so late in the story, and it bothers me because now certain details seem inaccurate. So, even with the lame Other Mind twist, the incredibly stupid story of the Scorching, the odd changes Tui made to the lore, and what became of Wasp's character, I still have more I disliked about the Flames of Hope. If you saw my Crazy Book 15 theory video and another one called This Character Needs to Die in the Flames of Hope, you'd probably see what I was expecting from this final installment. Oh boy, was I disappointed! This book was the perfect opportunity to include a dark, gritty storyline that made the Other Mind infecting both continents seem like a zombie apocalypse. But alas, that is not what we got. Since this was set up to be one of the darkest books in the series, I was expecting at least one major character death in some kind of darker tone. Sure, we got a little bit of that darker tone a few times, but it lacked the drama that everyone was expecting. When the dragons were disappearing slowly and the gang started to split up, I was so excited. I was like, oh man, they're going to be picked off a few at a time. This is going to be perfect. Luna will likely have to battle them all at the end. As the book progressed, more signs pointed towards this happening. I could not contain my excitement. Until I realized it wouldn't happen. Tui set that up just to put the focus more on Luna. Come on! It would have been perfect to see an infected Moonwatcher, Sundew, Link, Tsunami, Keely, Bullfrog, Pineapple, and maybe even Cricket. Having them slowly get picked off a few at a time or splitting up perfectly set up Luna having to battle her own friends in the end, feeling more empty than ever. The fact that this didn't happen made me immediately realize just how poorly written and messy this book is. Tui tried to avoid every possible trope to the point where it just felt so weird and confusing. I understand you wanted to try something original with the whole idea of Cottonmouth and freedom controlling the other mind, but it turned out to be a complete mess. I also got excited when what I predicted came true. Sort of. Luna originally had a distaste for Cricket, but over the course of the book they ended up bonding. Then I was hoping my idea of Cricket dying and her death being devastating would finally come true, and the story was sort of hinting at it. But instead we got 0 major character deaths. The stakes seemed incredibly low, and it was disappointing beyond belief. The Flames of Hope would have been perfect if, a few at a time, Luna's friends started to split up or go missing, just like what we got in the actual book. By the end, it would only leave Luna, who had to figure out a way to stop her friends, who would be infected by the other mind. Luna's whole worry about causing other dragons harm would make this extremely difficult for her, and then she would have to save the day. By herself. Luna's the kind of character who wants to help others and change the world, she just doesn't want to be the one on the pedestal receiving the glory. So this would have been perfect to see. Luna would be by herself, forced to save the world on her own. No more Sundew and Tsunami to fight their way out of everything, no more of Keely's brilliant plans, no more assistance from other dragons. Just her. Probably my most major complaint was how boring this book could be at times. There were only 3 action sequences, and Luna, the literal protagonist, participated in none of them. She never raised a talon to help, except during the end when she cut through the vine growing between Cottonmouth and Freedom. Still, I'd say about 80% of the book was just Luna sitting in the mind space, doing absolutely nothing except watching brief bits of action. There were no stakes at all in this book, and Wasp being sidelined definitely didn't help. Even though I could rant about my dislikes for ages, I'll cut it down to one final major complaint. The epilogue's implications. Don't get me wrong, I love the sweet ending and the epilogue that we got. More on that later. My problem is that it set up dragon and human relations, the one thing the fandom has begged Tui to not make Arc 4 about. There are 2 ways this ending can be interpreted. It is leaving things open-ended for the series and will close here, letting you speculate about how the world will become, and the other being that Arc 4 will be about dragons and humans coexisting. I hated how vague this is, because Tui knows that fans want the answers to whether or not there will be more books. I can understand why she did this, though. It would give her time and a reason to still back out if she felt like the series shouldn't continue, because it did end without any cliffhangers. No matter if she did it, it wouldn't feel like we were left with some reason for the story to continue. The best epilogue, however, would have been so easy for Tui to make. Now that the continent's inhabitants are getting to know each other and the world is united, this was the perfect opportunity to set up Bumblebee, Auklet, Cliff, and Dusky to go to Jade Mountain Academy or have their own adventures. The epilogue could still be the way it was before, especially with the heartwarming and mostly satisfying ending. But Cricket or Luna could have mentioned the idea of Bumblebee visiting the other continent, lightly teasing the idea of her being the first protagonist for Arc 4. There would obviously be a time skip of some sorts, but this idea would have fit so well. It makes sense now more than ever because the continents and their tribes are mostly united. Sadly, I don't think we'll ever end up getting an Arc 4 based on the new generation of Dragonets. Dragonslayer's epilogue, when matched up with the Flames of Hope's, hints that Dragon and humans won't be coexisting peacefully at first. There will be turmoil, and it will likely be the center of conflict for the possible Arc 4. Okay, time to dive into things I actually did like in this book. Even though I feel like the flaws are overshadowed by the fandom due to the sad moments, I found myself enjoying a little bit of this finale. The first thing I absolutely loved in The Flames of Hope was the beginning. Seeing Luna, Bullfrog, Pineapple, Tsunami, Keely, Moon, Sky, Wren, Lynx, and Cricket bond was such a treat. I liked how it started to set up the idea of Luna being separated from everyone, even though we actually didn't get to see that. I completely relate to Bullfrog a lot, and it was so much fun to read about the Secret Stealth Team's members. Though most were overshadowed and ultimately didn't receive enough time to shine, I liked every bit of what we saw. Second would be that the Flames of Hope had the perfect ratio of dragons and humans. I was so proud of Tui, and she likely saw and noted about how the fandom as a whole doesn't enjoy scavengers. They were still there but weren't overused, and I'm super glad about that. The story centered around dragons, so it acknowledged the humans and still managed to make them feel somewhat important to the story without it feeling overbearing. Plus, Sky was actually tolerable in this book. You can't read this book and not shed a tear when Freedom sacrificed herself. Wings of Fire's only made me cry once, and that was when Morrow's fear sense quit away. It was 3 a.m., okay? But oh my goodness, I sobbed when Freedom got her name. It was just the perfect emotional conclusion to this book, and seeing her go from Lizard, a bitter and vengeful dragonet, to Freedom, someone who was willing to sacrifice herself and see the greater good, was so heartwarming and emotional. I loved how subtle the changing of the way she viewed things was, and how Freedom tried desperately to act like she was tough. Slowly, she started to change and develop. It was such great character development, and I generally found myself crying when she actually got a name. Freedom deserved better, and I'm still recovering from that wave of sadness I felt after seeing her die. So, even though Cottonmouth is a completely lame villain, seeing Freedom's progression and ultimate sacrifice made it worth it. And finally, Luna and Swordtail must be discussed. The flashbacks and memories of their time together made me so emotional, and I'm all here for moments like these in the future. It's crazy how one book completely changed my view on Swordtail, making him much more likable. The scenes we got of this couple were some of my new favorites in the series. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. Honestly, I'm still not sure how I feel about the Flames of Hope. I have mixed feelings, but the one thing I can say for sure is that this book is completely weird at times. It's not the worst thing in the series, but it isn't great for being a finale. What did you guys think? Let me know down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!